the US Space Force just quietly confirmed something that sounds like science fiction. A private satellite internet network built for the Pentagon, designed to keep working when everything else gets jammed, hacked, or blown apart. And it's called MILNET. Yep, that name. And the wild part, this MILNET isn't a couple satellites. It's not even a small constellation. Officials have described it as 480-plus satellites, nearly 500 spacecraft, forming what Space Force leaders have called a future space mesh network. And SpaceX is right in the middle of it. So, is this real? Is it actually a private network for war? And why are people in Congress already nervous about it? In a second, we're going to unpack what MILNET actually is, what we know, what's still classified, and why this could reshape how the US military moves data in a conflict. All right, to understand why MILNET is such a big deal, you need to understand one harsh reality about modern warfare. Weapons don't win wars, networks do. Because in today's fights, the side that can sense faster, decide faster, and coordinate faster wins. And that means the battlefield isn't just tanks and jets, it's data. Where is the threat? Who sees it first? Who shares it first? Who can act on it first? And here's the ugly truth. Every network the military depends on is a target. SATCOM is a target. GPS is a target. Ground fiber is a target. Radio links are a target. So the question becomes, if someone tries to disrupt the US military's communications in a major conflict, what's the backup plan? For years, the answer was a mix of classic military SATCOM in higher orbits, hardened, protected links, and commercial services when needed. But then something happened that changed the entire conversation. SpaceX built Starlink, and suddenly, satellite internet wasn't a slow, expensive, niche thing anymore. It was fast, it was everywhere, and most importantly, it was proliferated. Thousands of satellites. If you lose one, who cares? That architecture is naturally resilient. It's the opposite of a few exquisite satellites model. And that's the moment the Pentagon started asking a new question. What if we had that kind of resilience, but built specifically for military use? I believe that's enough suspense, so let's reveal what MILNET actually is. What MILNET is, and why the name is kind of genius. First, MILNET is a real, publicly acknowledged Space Force program now, even if most details are still wrapped in classified contracting and vague language. In June 2025, a Space Force SATCOM leader publicly described MILNET as a new, government-owned, contractor-operated satellite communications constellation in low Earth orbit, and he said the constellation comprises 480-plus satellites. That's not a rumor, that's a number that came out in a public setting. Now, here's the twist that almost nobody talks about. MILNET is also an old name. Back in the early internet days, MILNET was the military side of ARPANET traffic, eventually evolving into what we now associate with unclassified DoD networks. So reusing the name is basically Space Force saying, this is the next military network era. But this time, the network isn't just cables and routers, it's in orbit. And here comes wow factor number one. MILNET is meant to plug into a bigger hybrid mesh network. A hybrid mesh network means two things at once. 1. A mix of DoD satellites and commercial satellites. 2. A network that can route data through multiple paths, like the internet does. So if one path is blocked, the data finds another route. In other words, MILNET isn't just about getting internet in a desert. It's about building information path diversity in space. So if a link gets jammed or disrupted, the network routes around it. And that's where things start to feel never seen before. Because the Space Force has said, flat out, that they've never operated a DoD hybrid mesh network at LEO like this. Now here's wow factor number 2, and it's the part that turns heads. SpaceX isn't just helping, SpaceX is operating it. MILNET is described as being operated by SpaceX, but overseen by Space Force operators, who direct the tempo of operations. That's a big shift. The US government owns the capability, but a commercial company runs day-to-day satellite operations under contract, with Space Force oversight. And the reason this is possible is because SpaceX already has the industrial machine, mass satellite production, rapid launches, existing ground infrastructure, a proven global network. So MILNET looks like a defense program that's borrowing the commercial playbook. Move fast, deploy at scale, iterate. And now, wow factor number 3, the part that makes it feel like a private network. Starlink versus Starshield, the civilian highway versus the military lane. MILNET is tied to SpaceX's Starshield ecosystem. If Starlink is the civilian version, consumer and business broadband, Starshield is the government-focused version designed for national security missions. And here's the key distinction that keeps getting repeated in reporting. Starlink satellites are owned by SpaceX. Starshield systems are positioned as government-owned and government-controlled, with extra security and encryption. That matters, because when people hear SpaceX plus military, they imagine the Pentagon just buying Starlink subscriptions. MILNET sounds like something different, a dedicated government-owned architecture designed to be more secure, more controlled, and more tailored to military requirements. Now here's where it gets really spicy. Because MILNET isn't designed to be isolated from Starlink, it can also connect into Starlink through specialized terminals. So picture this like a two-layer system. Layer 1, a dedicated military backbone. Layer 2, the commercial constellation as surge capacity. That's a huge deal for scaling, and it creates a mini cliffhanger. If MILNET can tap into Starlink, and Starlink is already enormous, what happens when the military can treat orbital broadband like a utility? Because that's the direction this points. Now, wow, factor number 4, and this is the part that makes MILNET feel like an actual network, not just satellites. The missing piece, making everything talk to everything. Space networks usually have a nasty problem. Even if you have a lot of satellites, they're not always interoperable. Different terminals, different waveforms, different standards. So the Space Force started pushing something called the Enterprise Space Terminal Program, EST, and the official Space Force language matters here. EST is designed to create cross-link compatibility among future space systems using a standardized waveform, so satellites carrying these terminals can talk to each other. And here's the line that connects it directly. ESTs are described as a key building block of MILNET. Translation: MILNET isn't just SpaceX satellites talking to SpaceX satellites. The long-term intent, as described publicly, is that MILNET becomes a transport backbone that other Space Force satellites can connect into as long as they have the compatible terminals. That's the plug-and-play dream. And if that actually becomes reality, you're looking at a future where satellites in different constellations, across different missions, can pass data through a shared mesh in space without everything being custom-built from scratch. That's not just cool. That's foundational for the military's big obsession right now, connecting sensors to decision-makers to operators faster than the enemy can react. Now, if MILNET is so good, why is it controversial? Because wow, factor number 5 is also the biggest uh-oh factor. Why MILNET triggered alarm bells, vendor lock, and the SDA question. At the exact moment MILNET started showing up more publicly, another Space Force storyline got louder. The Space Force signaled it was pausing plans to buy a third batch of the space development. Agencies transport layer satellites while it studies alternatives, and multiple outlets reported that MILNET is one of those alternatives, meaning MILNET could potentially take over a chunk of the mission SDA's transport layer was supposed to do, moving data fast around the globe in orbit. And that matters because SDA's transport layer was built around competition, multiple vendors, and open architecture ideas. So lawmakers asked the obvious question: if MILNET is largely tied to SpaceX, are we getting too dependent on one company? In hearings, Senator Chris Coons raised concerns about MILNET being sole-sourced and lacking competition and open architecture. And Space Force leaders responded by basically saying decisions are still under consideration. Another key detail: the Space Force's fiscal 2026 budget request included $277 million for MILNET, one of the first times it showed up publicly in that kind of way. So on one hand, MILNET looks like speed and scale. On the other hand, critics worry it could create a single vendor dependency if not handled carefully. And honestly, that tension is the story. MILNET is the collision of two realities. Reality 1, the military needs LEO scale resilience now. Reality 2, the military can't afford to build its entire future on one proprietary ecosystem. So where does that leave us? This is the part you have to hold in your head at the same time. MILNET is being described as a space mesh network for resilience and information path, diversity, and at the same time, officials say the long-term intent is plug-and-play and not SpaceX-dependent in the strategic sense. Those goals are not impossible to reconcile, but they require real standards, real interoperability, and real acquisition discipline. Otherwise, you get the worst outcome, a super-capable network that only one company can truly expand, upgrade, and control. Now let's zoom out, because this is the big takeaway. MILNET is the Pentagon treating space like a real-time data layer. For decades, the US used space for GPS positioning, missile warning, spy satellites, strategic communications. MILNET points towards something more like space as a battlefield internet, a resilient, low-latency transport layer where information can move even when parts of the network are degraded. And this is why the clickbait title is not entirely wrong. A private network for war is dramatic language, but the core idea is real. Building a dedicated, resilient, military-focused broadband-style network in LEO capable of supporting operations at the pace of real conflict is something the US has never operationalized at this scale before. And the final cliffhanger is this: if you can move data like this, what else becomes possible? More autonomous systems, more real-time coordination, more distributed operations, more survivable command and control, and maybe, just maybe, the military starts thinking about space not just as assets, overhead, but as the nervous system of everything happening on the ground, at sea, and in the air. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Should the US military build its own Starlink-style network, or should it keep leveraging commercial constellations with stronger controls and open standards? Drop your take in the comments. And if you want more breaking-style deep dives like this, subscribe, because the next wave of space defense isn't going to look like the past. It's going to look like the internet, but built for the harshest day imaginable. See you next time.